Hello and welcome, everybody. It's great to be with you. Some people who I get to see on a very regular basis here at CBI, some friends across the country and even beyond to some other countries. So very, very glad to be together with all of you. Was pretty overwhelmed by the number of signups we got for this online class. We have, last I looked right before signing off, about 150 people who signed up on any given night. I'm sure that will mean not quite all of those folks are able to join every single time. So we are recording this and it will be available each week in a YouTube channel. But I'm just absolutely delighted to have this space together and to have the chance to dig into some really meaningful and extremely timely kind of text. I hope that over the course of the time we spend together, you will have a lot of opportunity in smaller groups to get to know other people on this screen, to dive into some really rich text and ideas and conversations. And I just hope that this will be a nourishing hour for all of us. We could all, wherever we are, however we're doing, we could all use a little bit of spiritual nourishment and the gift that comes with being in community and conversation with one another. The way that we can help make this the most impactful that it can be, well, just a couple of things. First is if your name isn't currently set to your name, if your name shows up as iPhone 1 or something like that, if you are able to change it, that would be great. And that just helps everybody to see who is in the space. And that will be helpful to me also, as I'm going to be needing to navigate between multiple screens. And you're very tiny. So it's helpful to be able to see names. It is really, really helpful to me as a educator when you have your camera on. I know that some people at this time are eating dinner or cleaning up the house or listening while driving or any of those things. You're welcome to do any of it. Your hair does not need to be great. My hair is barely attached these days. You do not need to be in fancy clothes, though I do appreciate that everybody seems to be wearing clothes at all. That was a problem early in the pandemic in Zoom teaching. You really, really don't need to be anything other than yourself, and your life is welcome on screen. And of course, if there's some reason that your connection doesn't allow you to be on screen or you don't feel comfortable, this is all by invitation, not by command performance. But I know I get so much more out of seeing the faces, and I think everybody does. So thank you for having your name visible. Thank you for having yourself visible. Thank you for being here. I am going to rather aggressively police the mute button, only because there are right now 68 different screens here, and that number keeps growing. And if we are off mute and we are hearing people's side conversation, it's very quickly going to become kind of nuts. So if you get a little pop-up on your screen that says, Rabbi Adam muted me, that's not me muting your opinion or your ideas or your personhood. That's me trying to keep us all from winding up with a big old Zoom headache when this is over. I'm going to be doing a fair amount of moving us back and forth between breakout rooms and whole group conversations, because I think particularly with this size, it's going to be really important that we have the chance to interact in smaller conversations. And as I said, what my goal is here is that this should be nourishing. And I think that nourishment really comes from talking with other wonderful human beings, some of whom you might know, many of whom you won't know, at least not yet. I'm going to start us off with just 5 minutes in breakout rooms, which is just purely for purposes of getting to know one another, of introduction. When you go into your rooms, there should be about 6 participants in each one. Can just take a moment to introduce yourself to one another, to share how you are connected to this circle, whether you come via CBI, or you were part of the intro program, or were connected in other ways. And most important, what's drawing you to want to study some Heschel now on your Wednesday nights? So I'm going to open up breakout rooms in a moment. For those who haven't used these before, haven't used them in a while, a pop-up will show up on your screen. All you have to do is click it, and you will be taken to a room. I'll count down about 5 minutes, and then I will yank you back. And the purpose is introduce yourself and how you got here, and in particular, what is drawing you to want to spend time with Abraham Joshua Heschel at this particular moment. All right. Breakout rooms are open. Go and schmooze. Isn't it the worst when you're just midway through a great conversation and that 60-second timer goes off and you get yanked back in? It's been 5 years of living in Zoom land. I'm still not used to it. Hopefully, you got the chance to chat with at least most of the people in your group, for people to get to start introducing themselves. And as I said, we're going to do a lot of breakout sessions with the hope very much that you get to meet and connect with other wonderful people. I'm just looking around the screen and seeing so many faces that I love. Makes me really happy. We are going to go into some biography of Heschel, and spend a little bit of time talking about his story, and then hopefully we'll have a chance to look at least one text tonight before we have to close. So let me pull up.
Okay, he died in 1972.
That's my bubby, everyone. She doesn't have to use the mute button. She's the only one who doesn't have to use the mute button.
Okay.
She's 92 and she's seen some things. And she's joining us from New York, where it's very late at night. And I'm not talking slow enough, but we love having her here. All right. Abraham Joshua Heschel. I asked when you signed up for how familiar people are with Heschel. Some people here have read quite a lot. Some people consider themselves brand new. I am not representing myself tonight as a Heschel scholar. I am representing myself as a Heschel lover. And I am really excited for this study group to be a reason to dig into many of the books that I have had on my shelf for 20 years that I've either never gotten through entirely, or even some of them I have yet to crack. I spent the last few days with a number of Heschel biographies, and in particular, a few essays written by his daughter, Dr. Susanna Heschel, who has really been the champion of her father's legacy, as well as a remarkable scholar at Dartmouth in her own right. And I wanted to spend just a little bit of our time together at the outset of this study group, going through and understanding the story of the man. Heschel was born January 11th, 1907. He was born in Warsaw, Poland. He was the youngest of 6 children. He was the scion on both sides of his family of Hasidic dynasties. The Hasidic movement begins with the Baal Shem Tov in 1760 in today's Ukraine, and is a movement of piety and spiritual renewal, a movement that taught that God is not far away or reserved just for the scholars, that God is accessible and available to every human being, a movement that took many of the deepest ideas from Torah and Talmud, and particularly from Kabbalah, from Jewish mysticism, and brought them down to the level of the regular Yid, helped us to be able to access this depth of spiritual wisdom by making it something that reflects the realities of our own lives. Heschel comes from Hasidic lines on both of his mother and father's side. On his father's side, he is the great grandson of Abraham Joshua Heschel of Apt. That's his namesake, the Apter Rav, uh, famous for being a rabbi who could tell you who you were in a past life. He was the past life regression guy. And here is Heschel, his namesake, several generations later, and the next great Hasidic Rav of his family. So maybe the reincarnation of the Apter Rav. Heschel is the youngest of 6 siblings, mostly sisters and one brother. He was the favored child and the baby who everybody enjoyed playing with. He developed a reputation as a little genius from early on. And when he was 5 or 6 years old, he used to be trotted out at parties, stood up on the table, and asked to give drashas, asked to give Torah interpretations. He was educated in traditional yeshivot, steeped in halachic and Talmudic text, and also learned the Hasidic traditions of his family. Life is good until the year 1916, when he is 9 years old, and his father dies of influenza, leaving the family very poor, and is one of the defining traumas of his life is losing his father so very young. As a teenager, as a 14, 15-year-old, he's already starting to publish articles on Talmud in Warsaw rabbinic publications and receives a traditional Orthodox smicha, an Orthodox ordination, before he's 18 years old. He transfers from Warsaw with his family's blessing to go study in a secular institution at a gymnasia in Vilna, where he goes from the closed world of Eastern European Hasids to a mixed world of Jews and non-Jews together. He graduates in 1927 and goes from Vilna to Berlin. And in Berlin, he simultaneously enrolls in 3 different institutions of higher learning. He is an overachiever through his whole life. That's going to be an ongoing theme. He enrolls at the, I don't speak or read any German, Hochschule für die Wissenschaft des Judentums, or something like that, which is a great institution in Berlin founded in the 1870s for what's called Wissenschaft, which is the scientific study of Judaism. It is the place where what we now know as Jewish studies as an academic discipline is born. And it's the gathering place for its 50 or 60 years before the coming of the Shoah, of the most important German Jewish scholars of the era. He is a rabbinic student at the Hochschule. He is a doctoral student in philosophy with a minor in art history and Semitic philology at Friedrich Wilhelm University, later Humboldt University. And he also takes classes at an Orthodox rabbinic yeshiva, which was on the same block as the Hochschule. And so he goes back and forth between this institution of academic Jewish studies, which is drawing these luminary scholars, and a very traditional Orthodox yeshiva, back and forth literally on the same block. And that really captures a lot of who Heschel was. He was a person who lived between worlds, a person who was at once deeply steeped in Eastern European Old World piety, possessor of Orthodox rabbinic ordination and a deeply traditional practice, and also somebody who lived and worked amidst all of the different denominations of Jews and very much in the interfaith space. He receives his ordination from the Hochschule in 1934, but they had already actually added him to the faculty 4 years earlier. He was already teaching Talmud at the place that would then ordain him. And his doctoral exams he passes in 1933 but he can't find a publisher for his dissertation because by this point Hitler has already come to power, and the publication of Jewish books is becoming more and more difficult. And so it actually takes 3 more years before he could find a publisher, actually in Poland, that would publish his dissertation and allow him to receive his doctorate. It's essential that this happened because this is the credential that would later allow him to get an academic visa to leave Germany, and to come first to London and then to the United States. Heschel's doctoral dissertation is on the Hebrew Bible, specifically on the prophets of the Hebrew Bible. And the dissertation will go on later to become the basis of a 2-volume book he publishes in 1962 called The Prophets. And the first essay that we are going to study together as a group is going to be the first chapter from the Prophets 1962, which goes back to doctoral work, and which he says is the origin for his social consciousness and his desire to be engaged, not just in the world of the mind and the world of the spirit, but the world in the political and social movements of his time. While he's studying at 3 different universities, again, overachiever, he is already publishing manuscripts. His first publication is a book of Yiddish poetry called Deshem Meforosh, the ineffable name of God, man. And it's a collection of poems that actually attracts wide attention across the Jewish poetry world. Chaim Nachman Bialik writes him a letter of acclamation. And we can see the fact that Heschel wrote first poetry in the philosophical books that are very much not written in prose. All of Heschel is poetry. And the fact that the first publication he puts into the world is explicitly poetry lays the groundwork for how he will write and think for the rest of his life. Heschel's, by the way, 5th language is English. Before Heschel knew a word of English, he already knew, let's see, Hebrew, Yiddish, Polish, and German. And so when we read this incredible poetic prose in these masterful books and essays, keep in mind he's operating in his 5th language. Pretty remarkable. And I found a note in one of the biographies that said, notable that Heschel continued to write his whole life in Hebrew, Yiddish, and English, producing major works in all 3. The biographer said, any scholar would feel proud to have produced one magnum opus. Heschel can be said to have produced multiple opus in 3 different languages. Bright guy, bright guy. Heschel's life comes to an abrupt fork in the road in 1938. He is teaching in Frankfurt, staying in a home of a Jewish family. There is a knock on the door, and the Gestapo is at the door and tells him that he has 1 hour to pack a maximum of 2 suitcases and go to the train station where he'll be deported back to Poland. Heschel packs as much as he can, particularly just imagining him loading these suitcases with his books and being taken down to a train, which takes a 3-day ride back to Poland. There is no ability to sit on that train. They stood day and night for 3 days. When they got to the Polish border police refused them exit, and they sat in the train station for many more days before it could be negotiated that Heschel could go back to his family. And this was the beginning of the Nazi, well, it's not the beginning of the Nazi years for him. He had already been living and working in Germany under Hitler's rule, but the beginning of the truly catastrophic period of this time. Over the next few years, Heschel's mother and 2 of his sisters would be taken to concentration camps and murdered. One of his sisters would die in a German bombing. All that remained of Heschel's family were two siblings who had come to the United States ahead of him before the war. Heschel is teaching in Poland in late 38, beginning of 39, as things are growing more and more dire. And 6 weeks before the invasion of Poland, which took place in September of 39, 6 weeks before the invasion of Poland, Heschel gets a visa to leave Poland and go to London. He gets that visa from the work of the president of the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, Dr. Julian Morgenstern, who saved 16 of the great European Jewish scholars by getting them academic visas and bringing them to this country when there were little other ways of getting people in as America closed its borders ahead of World War II. Heschel was brought to Cincinnati to the Hebrew Union College, which was the flagship school of the Reform movement. It is hard to imagine a more fish out of water individual than Heschel, coming from his Polish Hasidic Eastern European background, his deeply educated, sophisticated European, Central European background, and being plopped into Cincinnati, of all places, in the Midwest. He is given a stipend of $1,500 for the year. I think even at that time, that's not a lot to live on. And he needs to live in student dormitories. He has a real problem because the dining hall at Hebrew Union College wasn't kosher, and there were no kitchen facilities in the student dormitories. So Heschel is trying to figure out how to feed himself, trying to figure out how to teach these American Reform rabbinic students at the time of the height of the classical Reform movement, when the texts and thinkers that Heschel grew up steeped in were the furthest thing from anybody's mind. He is truly, truly a fish out of water. And of course, this is a time of great personal catastrophe as he corresponds with his mother and sisters, and eventually the letters stop coming. And it's during these years that his family is deported and murdered. The point of light, well, one point of light is that he got out and got to America and remained grateful forever for America and to the Hebrew Union College for his salvation. The other point of light is that Heschel met and married his wife, Sylvia, during this time. She was a concert pianist, and he was invited to a recital, and it said that he fell in love with her on the spot. He listened to her play and said, "That's the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with." They courted and ultimately married, I learned, here in Los Angeles or in Southern California. I don't know where they got married, but I'd be very curious to go to where the Heschels got married. After 5 years at Hebrew Union College, he receives an invitation to join the faculty at JTS, at the Jewish Theological Seminary, then the only conservative movement school ordaining rabbis. I am loyal to the Ziegler School, so I never refer to JTS by what JTS wants to be referred to as the flagship institution, as one of the flagship institutions of the conservative movement. He becomes a professor there of Jewish ethics and mysticism. The mysticism part meant that he was always held at some arm's length by much of his fellow faculty, who didn't necessarily see a scholar of mysticism as a serious person. They were deeply enmeshed in the academic study of Bible and Talmud. And here's this guy with this old world beard and these spiritual messages, the guy who walks in to his classes and famously would announce to his students, "Students, this morning I witnessed a miracle." And everybody would get quiet and lean in, and Heschel would say, "The sun came up." And everybody would groan and roll their eyes. So less a fish out of water at JTS. At least he can get kosher food on the Upper West Side. But still a person who does not fit neatly into boxes. During his time at JTS during the 1950s and early 60s, he's incredibly prolific, putting out book after book, sometimes more than one, significant philosophical book per year. Books like Man is Not Alone, The Sabbath, Man's Quest for God, God in Search of Man, You're Detecting a Theme. His publication of The Prophets, of his doctoral dissertation in 1962, the start of what many people consider his philosophic magnum opus, Torah Min HaShemayim, a study of rabbinic theology, the first volume in 1962, the next volume in 1965. The last volume would be published posthumously in Hebrew. So he is writing and writing and writing at the same time as he is teaching and as the Heschels are raising their daughter Susanna. And in addition to all of this academic work, Heschel is becoming more and more involved in interfaith and social justice spaces. In 1961, Heschel selected by the American Jewish Committee to start meeting with the Catholic Church in the process that would culminate in Nostra Aetate, the document that came out of Vatican II, which completely upended the relationship between Jews and Catholics as it had stood for 1800 years in a good way. It's Nostra Aetate, in which the Catholic Church renounces the idea that Jews are responsible for killing Jesus. It is in Nostra Aetate that the Catholic Church officially renounces the mission to convert the Jews. Heschel is the leading Jewish figure in those conversations and negotiations, first with Cardinal B, and later on in a series of private audiences with two popes, in which he really becomes the Pope's rabbi, in addition to everything else he is putting out and laying down. I want to turn us to the first piece of text. This class is meant to be open-ended. We will get through what we get through, and we are meant to meet every week. Everybody who can is welcome, and knowing that nobody will be free every Wednesday night. But I want us to luxuriate in time. I don't want to be constantly saying, we need to get through this, we need to get through this to get to the next thing. We'll get through what we get through tonight. And I want at least for us to take a look at this text as a starting point for our look at Heschel's ideas. This comes from the first page of God in Search of Man, his philosophy of Judaism, published in 1955. It's meant as a companion volume to 1951's Man's Search for God. So this is the God and Man series. Man's Search for God is about religion in general. God's Search for Man is about Judaism in particular. And the opening page of that book is something that many lovers of Heschel take as their invitation. I heard a podcast in which Arnie Eisen, former chancellor of Jewish Theological Seminary, describes reading this page as his aha moment that he says leads him on his journey to becoming a noted professor of Jewish studies at Stanford, and eventually the chancellor. I have not had nearly as prestigious of a rise from when I first encountered this text when I was in college, but it has been a formative one for me. He begins, "It's customary to blame secular science and anti-religious philosophy for the eclipse of religion in modern society. It would be more honest to blame religion for its own defeats." Before we go any further, what is Heschel saying? Heschel saying that there are always voices who say that religion is in crisis because of some outside force, some outside enemy. Religion is in crisis because of philosophical secular ideas. Religion is in crisis because of the rise of science replacing the need for spirituality. Religion is in crisis because popular culture is distracting. Religion is in crisis because fill in the blank with whatever social or political or intellectual force is most prominent, that these are the things which cause religion to decline. Heschel says, I'm having none of it. It would be more honest to blame religion for its own defeats. Religion declined, he said, not because it was refuted, but because it became irrelevant, dull, oppressive, insipid. When faith is completely replaced by creed, worship by discipline, love by habit, when the crisis of today is ignored because of the splendor of the past, when faith becomes an heirloom rather than a living fountain. I love that line. When faith becomes an heirloom, just something we are focused on passing down and putting in the china cabinet, putting up on the mantle. Don't touch. It's a family heirloom rather than something alive that is bringing new meaning and new purpose in each generation. When religion speaks, he says, only in the name of authority rather than in the name of compassion, its message becomes meaningless. Oy vey. What is Heschel saying about religion's defeat? Religion's defeat doesn't come from the scientists or the philosophers or the purveyors of popular culture or the fact that people care more about a ball game or a TV show or a modern novel than they do about the Bible. Religion's defeat comes from the fact that we religious people, have allowed religion to get frozen in time, to become something dead, a specimen to be examined, an obligation to be passed along, rather than a living, breathing, vibrant, loving thing. He says, religion is the answer to man's ultimate questions. When the moment we become oblivious to ultimate questions, religion becomes irrelevant and its crisis sets in. The primary task of the philosophy of religion is to recover the questions to which religion is an answer. I'll read that again. Religion is an answer to man's ultimate questions. Please don't get hung up on the gendering here. He's writing in 1955 to people's ultimate questions. The moment we become oblivious to ultimate questions, religion becomes irrelevant and its crisis sets in. The primary task of philosophy of religion is to recover the questions to which religion is an answer. Heschel is interested in getting us back to the fundamental questions. The fundamental questions that in every generation we need to ask anew about meaning and purpose and justice and goodness and God and humanity. And it's by getting back behind the answers, the pat answers passed down from generation to generation, getting back to the questions, that we can begin a conversation about what faith can mean for us. I'm going to put you back into breakouts, and I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to have a conversation about these three questions. Now, I sent you the text ahead of time. I did not actually include the slide that has these questions. So if you're able to either screenshot this very quickly or quickly write down just a couple of words so that you'll remember what the questions are. The questions in short are, how does Abraham Joshua Heschel's critique of religion resonate with your own experience of religion? Have you found that religion has declined, or religions that you have encountered at various points in your life have declined because of these sorts of things? Oppressive, insipid, boring? Is he being fair? What do you understand Heschel to mean by ultimate questions? And how might the practice of religion look differently if we took this passage seriously? That's the big question. How might religion look differently if we took seriously this passage, that the purpose is to get back to ultimate questions? I'm going to mix up the breakout room so you meet new people. And I'm going to send you out. It is 6:45. I'm going to send you out for 10 minutes and bring you back at 5 minutes to the hour. Good. I got to dip into a few of the rooms, and there were just wonderful conversations happening. And I can't wait to keep them going. I'll close with this. Heschel wrote and spoke a great deal about what he called religious behaviorism, which is the rote going through of rituals and actions because they are the prescribed ways of being in the texts. And to be clear, he was an extremely observant Jew. He was not interested in advocating for people not to go through those behaviors. But he was not satisfied with simply treating religion like it's a checklist. Did I eat kosher today? Did I celebrate certain holidays this year? Did I make it to synagogue X number of times? There's a famous story of a student who goes to their rabbi and says, "Rabbi, what should I study now? I've gone through the entire Talmud." Actually, I haven't just gone through the entire Talmud. I went through the entire Talmud 3 times. And the teacher says back to the student, "Okay, so how many times has the Talmud gone through you?" Right? It is one thing to make our way through the text, to make our way through the rituals, to live the life and walk the walk. But Heschel is demanding of us a higher level of engagement. And it begins, he says, by getting to the big core questions, to the questions about who we are and what we're doing here, who God is and what God wants from us, what it actually means to be there in community for one another, to love our neighbors. And what I hope this study group will be a chance to pull back from the world as it is, from the cycle of outrages and unprecedented events that now we need a new word for, because if everything is unprecedented, then I guess it's all just the way it is now. We're going to pull back from the reactivity and zoom into some big ultimate questions and give each other permission and grace to be able to spend an hour of our lives dwelling in those questions with each other. So all this hour was meant to be was a very first appetizer course and a amuse bouche, if you will, to encourage you to come back next week and the week after that. I will make the recordings available. As you can see, the really good stuff is happening in breakout groups. So just watching a recording is going to give you the lay of the land, but it's not really going to give you the replacement for being here. And so I really do hope that as much as you can on Wednesday nights, you'll come and join. And if life gets in the way and you need to step away for a few weeks, you're welcome back at the party. And we're just going to keep going as long as we're having fun. And maybe more people will join us and people might need to step away. But I'm already leaving this feeling good, and I hope you are too. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and let's see y'all back in a week.
See you next week. Thank you.
Yashikoff.
Ashikawa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Love
Thank
you.
you.